So I'm going to say, I've got a quote here from Dr. Gabor Mate. Sorry if I've butchered his name, but this is an incredible quote. And it's: the greatest damage done by neglect, trauma, or emotional loss is not the immediate pain they inflict, but the long-term distortions they induce in the way a developing child will continue to interpret the world and her situation in it.
That's a pretty long quote.
It's a very long quote, but if I was to decipher that quote, it's simply saying that what you experience as a child or, as an infant, as a newborn, does not just distort how you view the world or change your behavior as a child, but it also changes the way you view the world as you grow older. So there's long-term distortions to the way you view the world and how you perceive things. It's an incredible quote because it really tells you how vulnerable an infant is or a child is at that point in time. But there are so many factors and so many little things that, parents or a primary caregiver can do it right or wrong that can have a domino effect as to how that child will turn out and how they view the world and how they view the adult relationships, their personal relationships, their friendships, relationships with their parents as well. So I think that's a good segue into actually talking about how does childhood trauma or childhood neglect, or how different parenting styles or, different scenarios where parents, may have a different approach to things could actually dictate how that child views the world in the long term.
Yeah, I think I was reading about this as well with attachment, referring to attachment styles. And what you said was quite right, going back to the quote that you were mentioning, that I think it doesn't just affect your view of the world, but affects your view of yourself as well. And I think they break it down where there's 4 attachment styles we went over, which was secure, and there was the anxious, avoidant, and there's the last one is called disorganized. And if you actually use that quote that you're going off, the perspective of you and the world, you can actually somewhat understand which attachment style that person will have in the adult relationships as well. So if your view of yourself I guess the question would be, how do you view yourself? Is it positive or negative? And how do you view other people? So if you view yourself as negative, or you have a negative narrative of yourself, and you view other people as negative, then you're most likely going to be in the disorganized attachment. Whereas if you view yourself positive and you view other people positive, then you're going to be insecure. And if it's swapped, where you have views of yourself positive and other people negative, then it's it becomes insecure attachment.
Which is the
anxious and avoidant. And the distinction between it, I think, was that anxious is when you have a negative view of yourself, but positive of other people. And the reason why it's anxious is because you have a low self-esteem, because you have a negative perspective of yourself, negative narrative. That can be through childhood experiences from bullying and so many other things that come into play. And the avoidant is you have a positive view of yourself, but negative of other people. And I suppose the reason is because fear of abandonment, fear of betrayal, things like that. And so you value independence more than being able to trust other people.
That's a really good perspective, because I didn't actually think, when you actually think of it, a lot of people think of attachment as what you perceive with other people. It's kind of in the definition of what attachment style is, right? It's how you bond with other people and how does that reflect and where does that go? But a lot of people, I think, I definitely missed this, but it's not reflecting on yourself as to who you are. But fundamentally, yeah, you're right. It's what you are that projects to other people and the environment around you. In terms of, if we looked at early childhood experiences, there's a lot of things there. And in terms of doing a bit of research and looking into it, it was quite interesting to see how little actions or little deviations on how you approach things as a parent could really dictate how your child perceives the world. And looking at it further, a child will learn more in the first 10 years than they will from age 10 onwards. So the first 10 years is like the most crucial time for a child in terms of, learning the basics, the fundamentals. But for an infant, for a newborn, that relationship with the primary caregiver is so important. And that even though the infant can't communicate through words, they're still infant, still learning, they're still communicating through a bond. And so when that bond is not fostered in a healthy manner, it does lead to long-term effects that we see around the world. Not around the world, but in people around the world that have, unfortunately, different attachment styles, different ways to approach things. And it's quite evident with people. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially in the first 10 years, when you think about an infant as well, newborn, the first point of reference of a relationship is the parents or the caregiver, right? How they've been treated is what they're going to have. That's going to be the perception of how you should treat other people and how other people you would expect to treat you. So I definitely agree that parents and caregivers, like the responsiveness and how they nurture their child and all those things, have a huge factor in how your child would basically perceive the world and how it affect like future relationships as well. So yeah, I think that's definitely very much true. And as you said, although they can't communicate through words, there's a certain emotion that's involved, and there's also a lot of other, you could say, there's chemical reactions that are happening, which we'll talk about later on. But there's a lot of, it's through bond and physical bond, especially, which doesn't necessarily have to be translated through words, that the child can feel and understand that this is not what is, and also if they're in an environment of where it's very toxic and chaotic to them as a child, because they don't know any better. They don't know what right or wrong is, right? They have to learn through consequences, but they might think that's normal. And then they think as they grow up that being abused and things like that is a normal thing. And to other people, they'll be like, that's not normal. Like, you shouldn't be in a relationship with someone who verbally or physically abuses you. But then, because they've been exposed to that as a child and haven't been told or have any reference of a healthy relationship, they pursue those things as normal. And anything that's outside of that is not considered to them normal. So it's almost psychologically sort of distorted them, going back to what you're saying.
Yeah, you're right. I think that's where it's like it becomes like a normalizing that behavior, or normalizing certain attributes that you shouldn't normalize. But there are a lot of key points as to what those early childhood experiences look like. Would you mind like running through or speak to like just
yeah, sure.
sharing what you've observed?
Going off like research and also reading the book called Attached and also observation, they say that in early childhood, there's a lot of important factors. And one of the main ones is like the parent's responsiveness, where when it's very important for the parent to be able to respond to their child's needs and be able to nurture it in a timely manner as well. And I think in this day and age, it's very difficult as well, because parents, they're working extra hours over time, having to do 2-3 jobs or something. And you can see how that can affect them, because they don't give that much exposure and time for the child. And I think that inconsistent and neglectful behavior ends up creating insecurity for the child, especially when they're like in the first 5-10 years. And that can eventually, with that neglecting the child's needs, can lead towards insecure type of attachments.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. There's, if we looked at it, there's secure, avoidant, anxious, and disorganized. If we were to look at an example, and again, I don't think this actually guarantees that, if you're secure, your child will be secure. But statistically, and research says that that's what it will lead to, right? Because you're fostering a healthy relationship. But from what I've observed and what I researched was, secure is, let's say you're in trouble or something, you've fallen, you've grazed your knee, you look back, your parents, like you've got someone there. Anxious would be, it's a very inconsistent show of emotions from your primary caregiver. So, you know, sometimes you get that, you get that overly healthy emotion response from your parent or your primary caregiver, but then at times you don't get it at all. And so it fosters an imbalance. And then avoidant is the child is left to themselves to deal with those emotions. There's no bond. And, you know, it goes back to what you're saying is there's actually a lot of factors. It's not simply a parent is neglectful. It's simply there are so many other factors that lead to that. And the disorganized is actually, it's actually a new one, I think, I don't think it was part of the original research from what I know, but it's based on a lot of neglect and trauma. So instead of a healthy bond, or you don't get the bond, or an imbalance of the bond, you actually get a negative response, whether that's through abuse, physical abuse, unfortunately, so it's quite interesting that just in little deviations of acts, you know, I've said it before, it leads to such a profound effect in the future.
Yeah, and I think especially as a child, like those memories, and like you have a lot of, your brain is very malleable, like your memories. And so a lot of these, and also it's like your reference points, like these are your initial reference points that you get. And these are memories that are tied to emotions and so many other things. So I think that's why it has like a huge effect on you as well. Like it impacts you for like throughout your adulthood as well.
Yeah.
Because your memories are just very, I would say, like you're more sensitive.
Yeah, I think I also think like a lot of people say, like, I mean, this is everyone, but you don't actually remember a lot of things from your childhood, or not childhood, but, you know, between ages from 0 to 5. But you still, it's interesting, even though you don't remember those distinct memories, and, you know, everyone else has memories of you. You know, I held you when you were 3 and we played here, and you're like, no, but you know, some people do remember, some don't, but you actually remember the feelings and the emotions that you felt, and that actually carries on subconsciously without you actually knowing it. And that's what fundamentally attachment styles is, right? It's your emotions at that point in time, or what you experience at that point in time, and what does that actually lead to at this point?
Yeah, definitely.
If we looked at statistics in terms of population between secure and insecure, what do the statistics look like there?
Yeah, so apparently from a study from like the American Psychological Association, they said that apparently 48.4% of the population are insecure. And they also analyzed data from 285 studies with 20,000 infant parents. And there's like quite a lot of interesting observations they found from there as well. But let's just go over that statistic. That's quite, did you think that it would be that high?
I think so. I think there's a quote that, you know, it's a very serious quote if I was to sort of bring it up, but if we look at how, you know, parenting styles and everything's changing, what people are like, I don't think people are perfect, right? And so because there's that imperfection, there's a lot of factors that lead to it. There's generational trauma, that's a big one, right? You know, what you experienced, you know, how, you know, for example, if we looked at the early 1900s, mid 1900s, in like violence towards your partner or any sort of abuse was deemed okay. Now, DV is a serious problem, right? But we also see how that affects the child. So that then leads to on like other issues. If we looked at, you know, World War I, World War II, the Cold War, different wars that have happened, the Great Depression, we're still, I wouldn't say we're feeling the exact impacts of that, but you can see that's it's leading to something. So I don't think I'm surprised, because there's always a reasoning as to, there's always factors that play into it. But the easiest quote that I that I think will that I think is quite true is, all children deserve parents, but not all parents deserve children. Which, again, this isn't, it's not to call out people that, or to say that, if you don't do X, you're not this, but there's a certain demographic of parents that are very neglectful, very abusive, and then there's people that actually maybe are first time to parenting. Maybe they don't have supportive parents that can help them as to understand how to parent, and they're learning along the ropes. And so I think now we've got a lot of free flow of information as to how to parent, attachment styles, how to approach things in a more healthy, fostered manner, instead of just going on instinct and doing what you've learned in the past or what you've seen in the past.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of it as well is I think we'll go more into it, but it's about having stability as well. And there's so many parts to stability. There's the financial part, there's the emotional, psychological, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people might not be in that position. Some people might not be in that position for their different reasons. And that's why I guess that quote, it feels like that quote resonates in that sense. That, not all parents in a way deserve
children.
Yeah.
I mean, that quote's a bit of on an extreme end, but I think sometimes it's very surprising how many kids come from very abusive households, and it's very unfortunate, and it's really sad.
Yeah, and there's a lot of responsibility as well for it. As
a parent, I agree 100%. I think that's what it's sort of touching on as well. It's like, you're a parent, but you're ready to actually bear on the responsibility of a parent.
Are you willing to compromise? Are you willing to give up some of your independence? Are you willing to, does this associate with the values that you have, that you want? Yeah, things like that, which are pretty important. Yeah. But going back to the study, basically, I'll give a summary of what the study was about, because it gives you quite interesting insights of that attachment styles. So what they found was that in a high socio-demographic risk environment, like say poverty, they found that there was a higher risk of being disorganized and avoidant. And in a second group, whose parents had mental illness, they had a higher chance of being disorganized than children who had two healthy parents. And then the last one is children with maltreatment, which is like abuse, verbal, or so on and so forth. They are also, even actually surprisingly, even just adopted from foster care, they had a higher chance of being disorganized attached as well. And so the conclusion was that to have a secure attachment style between children and parents, it's more likely to develop. It's dependent on stress levels that are involved in the environment. Obviously, the less, which means more stability, the more likely they will be secure. But the more instability, the more stress is involved, the less they are, the more likely they're going to develop an insecure attachment. And stability is, as I said, it's like social, psychological, financial. There's so many aspects to it.
Yeah. I think that's the biggest call out there, is that stability. Yeah, you're right. Stability isn't just factored on being kind to your child. It's the home you create. It's the relationship you build with your family, with your partner. I think that's the biggest one. I think as a child, you pick up how your mother or your father treats their significant other, right? If you don't see a healthy bond there, you subconsciously you reel that in a bit. And it's why we see, abusive relationships in the as adults. It's because that behavior to them, or what they observe, as normalized. Even though that child can't see anything, I mean, they can't say anything, sorry, they can see it, but they can't, verbally express that. They still feel that the energy. And I think the energy you create around a child, or even in any home, I think, even now as adults, the energy you create is the consequences you're going to get from that. So if you don't create that stability and you're, constantly, and I mean, you're going to have arguments, you're going to have disagreements, but how do you actually show that in front of a child? Are you someone that takes it behind closed doors, or do you just yell at each other in front of a child? It all impacts the child perceives that in different ways, and they exhibit that behavior in different ways. And so there's one interesting part here is that cultural influences. And I think this is a pretty interesting one, because I feel that brown boys are very nurtured by their mothers, like extremely, right? And this is no disrespect to any, and no disrespect to a brown boy that hasn't received that, but I think a lot of brown guys, and this is just culturally speaking, we're very, very overly nurtured, I feel like, at times where, would you agree with that?
100% agree. Like we're overly nurtured, as you said, especially when you spend more time with your mom. I think you end up building a lot of those soft type of tendencies or qualities. I'm going to be honest, because I've spent more time with my mom, to be honest, than my dad.
Yep.
And obviously that's because my dad was working hard and doing a lot of other things. And so I've found that I've had a couple of those soft tendencies as well that have developed. But as you grow older and you go through experiences, you start to develop different types of traits and qualities. But yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think that there's a lot of nurturing by brown parents. Yeah,
it's true, right?
Yeah, I don't deny it.
The memes aren't even a lie. It's so true. But no, it is. It's but I think that's my experience from being in an ethnic household. Can I say the same for any other households? Probably not, but I think it's a good point. Was there anything else you observed from doing research around the different cultures and how that could impact attachment styles?
No, I haven't done anything like in-depth research about it, but I presume just thinking about it in terms of just thinking about our current experience versus someone from a tribe, it would be very different, because someone from a tribe, there's more independence, I feel, for especially a boy. They have to grow up at a very young age. They have a lot of responsibilities, a lot of things to learn. Because I think the way that just going off what I've read from tribes and stuff, is they are sort of taught at a young age to be able to replace their fathers. But it's at a very early age that happens. So I feel like that in that attachment, and they have to become more independent and things like that. So and less dependent, less reliant on their parents in a way. Mm-hmm. I think that would be a very different experience as to how we are raised.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be interesting to actually speak, to understand that a bit more, I think, is different cultures, different attachment styles, because there has to be research or something around it, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I would presume so. Internal working models, how does that relate to attachment styles?
So I think internal working models is just how this refers to more of the self view. And I feel like this is what is not really much talked about in attachment styles, because it's always talking about other people and labeling, whereas this is more about how you perceive yourself. So I think let me just, the way I would explain it is, it's where when you're a child, you develop basically an internal working model of yourself and also others, but it's based off your experiences. So obviously a positive internal working model would be having positive experiences. So being nurtured, having emotionally available parents, being taken care of, looked after, those types of things, having physical bond, playing with your parents, things like that. That's more of a positive internal working model. And also being encouraged in sports, and then being proactive. And then, so that will develop a positive self-view. And you also end up building trust in others, especially when you're a child and you play sports. You have to rely on other people. You can't just depend on just yourself. And those types of activities, like the more environments you're in team building type of environments and things like that, it builds a positive relationship of you and other people. Whereas a negative internal model would be the complete opposite, where it's just you're abused, you're bullied a lot, where you have to go through it independently all the time. And anything you do, even if you do something that's like a good achievement, it's never ever recognized. And it's just, if anything, it's the opposite. It's like you should do more. And without that, I'd say affection and attention, it leads to a lot of other negative views about yourself and of the world. And it builds like more rebellious tendencies. Because I think as a child, especially, we always want attention. I'm not going to deny that. I always wanted attention. Yeah. And it's just like, if you don't receive it, even when you do good things, you're going to do rebellious things because that's going to get attention. I think that's where like the rebellious type of behaviors come from, because you're not receiving the attention, whether or not you're doing good or bad things, good things. So it's just,
yeah.
And I think that's where that internal model comes from. It can be positive or negative depending on the experiences that you have. And obviously that is based on how other people treat you. And it doesn't just affect how you view other people, but it affects how you view yourself.
Yeah, I think the self-perception part is very important, because I think people don't actually have a chance to actually sit down and decipher their childhood, how they grew up, and actually self-reflect as to where is this coming from? Where am I feeling this from? Why do I think this way? Why am I reacting this way? Why am I behaving this way? Why am I so emotional about this? There's a lot of reasons to that. I think there comes a point where I'm really glad you brought up the self-perception, because I think people lack that curiosity to question themselves a bit. I think it's just the way I am. Well, not really, because there's a lot of things that could have impacted your life. But I also think it's the way we perceive others, right? And I think the reason I say that is I think we're so disconnected in this day and age.
Why do you say that?
I feel like because, if you like going to work, for example, you just see everyone, and this isn't a criticism to every single person out there, because I don't know, everyone does it, but everyone's focused on their phones, or everyone's focused on themselves. And I think that's been a bit of a norm. Like at the end of the day, everyone is very focused on themselves and what they want. You can sense the energy that people are very closed off, because, everything's online in a way. So that's where it comes from. I think for me, that's my observation.